Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. And today we are joined by Tamara Lich, a woman whose courage, resilience, and commitment to Canadians' freedoms have made her a central figure in one of the most defining moments of our recent history, the Freedom Convoy. Tamara, thanks for being here and for sharing your story with us. It's nice to see you.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me. Long overdue. I'm really honored to be invited. Thank you.
Yeah, it has been. I'm glad that we're finally getting together and chatting, because definitely have wanted to hear the story firsthand. We've covered it a bunch, over the years, but yeah, getting the firsthand perspective is something that I've been looking forward to. So yeah, why don't we just start there actually with kind of when you realized that you needed to take some action, kind of what the line you saw crossed was, and then just how that organization came together and essentially led up to the Freedom Convoy itself.
Well, I felt very early on during the pandemic that something was wrong and something didn't feel right. And obviously, when we first started seeing some of the videos that was coming out of China was, a bit alarming. But what I noticed almost immediately was a wave of propaganda like I hadn't really seen in my lifetime before. And also, in my former life, I was into fitness. I was a personal trainer and an educator for a fitness organization. And so when they started closing the gyms right away, I started asking a lot of questions anyways. And then just throughout the duration of it, how the stories that I was hearing from friends and family about how they were being treated and basically segregated from society. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I think, early on, we were told it was just going to be 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And then all of a sudden it was 2 years, and it was just getting darker and darker and darker. And so I felt like I wanted to try and do something if I could. And my husband and I were out in Manitoba for most of the pandemic because we didn't want to be stuck in the city, not able to leave our home. And so we came back in November of 2021, started back at our old jobs. And then, of course, in January, a friend of mine sent me a TikTok video put out by a gentleman by the name of Chris Barber. And so I tracked down his number and I gave him a call. And I said, hey, my background is administration, organization, and logistics. How can I help you? And the rest is history, as they say.
So once the two of you got together, how long was it from that first conversation till essentially wheels were rolling?
10 days.
Oh, wow.
It was 10 days. I called him on January the 13th, and there was already a small group of them that had been meeting and planning something. To my knowledge, they just hadn't for sure decided if they were going to do slow rolls, around the capitals in the country, or if they were going to go to Ottawa, or what they were going to do. So, and then, it was the 13th when I called him, the 14th when I set up the GoFundMe and the Facebook page, and the 24th is the day that we left. So 10 days later was actually the first time I got to shake his hand.
Damn. Next up, I'd really want to hear sort of, what was your experience like when you were there? So in kind of like 5 minutes or less, like, how was your experience when you were there? How were you treated? How did you feel the event went? And really, how were you treated by government and enforcement?
Well, I was so busy. All of us were so terribly busy, especially the first week or two, that, I didn't barely make it up to the Hill for the first week. We were in meetings, obviously, dealing with GoFundMe and then Give, Send, Go. And there was, just so much going on. Of course, because my name was on the GoFundMe, I had lots of people always coming to me for money to help them, with whatever they needed. So it was quite busy, but it was really quite a mixture of emotions, because to see all those people on the streets and along the highways was very uplifting and heartwarming. But then there was always, the threat of arrest, or, we caught on very early that the police were less than honest with us on a number of occasions. So it was really like a mixed bag of emotions, but mostly just pride and the hope in Canadians' eyes that we saw was amazing.
Right on. And so, one of the things you mentioned there was honesty coming from the police force. And I think that is probably one of the biggest narratives around the whole Freedom Convoy itself, is just how manipulated it was from essentially, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be media, to what was actually happening on the ground. And so one thing I've heard you cover a lot is the essentially the organized media campaign against you in these coordinated narratives that were being pumped through the biggest outlets in the country. And so what was that narrative that they were trying to spin compared to the reality on the ground?
Well, I mean, they started that with that narrative, crafting that narrative. Again, before I even shook Chris Barber's hands, we have text message evidence that came out at the POEC between the PMO and the Public Safety Office, where they were talking about it. And they were talking about how to frame the narrative, that Global had already picked up on it and was willing to work with them, basically. And that they were going to frame it as a January 6th style insurrection. And, we're just regular middle class, boring everyday people. There was no insurrection at all, but the way that they were trying to frame it right from the start. And they even said right in those text messages that they didn't want to come on too strong with their narrative because they didn't want us to push out the crazies. So they were actually hoping that we would keep an element. Of course, when you have anything that size, you're going to have people come in that have their own agendas, but you don't paint the whole. I mean, Black Lives Matter had some pretty questionable characters, but they didn't paint the whole movement as that. We never heard any of that stuff. And so it was pretty obvious right off the bat how the media and the politicians and the police were going to frame this. And then we also found out during our trial, which we didn't know at the POEC, was that the chief of police at that time, Peter Slowly, had instructed his officers not to negotiate with us or give us 1 inch. Not 1 inch was his quote. But he neglected to tell his own PLT officers that were our liaison team on the ground. And we also have a recording from an OPP officer the day after the raid on Coventry, apologizing profusely to us, saying that the Ottawa Police Service was not transparent with them or not being honest with them about the raid, and so that they were pulling out of the city.
So they were coordinated from the get-go, not just on their narrative, but also when they were going to sort of mobilize force and then how they were going to manipulate you guys from sort of an internal perspective. That's interesting because I just haven't seen all of those details. And I think that's the kind of stuff that I don't think a lot of Canadians really know about. What would you say are the other really specific and impactful things that happened in that same sort of breath where, we don't hear about it, but about how everything went based on how your trial played out?
Oh boy, there's a lot there. One of the interesting things was that the sergeant in charge of the public liaison team was never called to testify, which was really interesting because all of us were pretty much assigned a PLT officer to deal with. This particular sergeant caused problems. He was definitely very dramatic, overly dramatic, lied to us on numerous occasions, accused us of lying to him on numerous occasions. And we were just trying to work with them. So, I mean, there was this really fine line, with the trust factor with the police services and the protesters. And that's why, when we actually went down to move trucks before we even had a deal signed with the city at Rideau and Sussex. And a lot of the protesters that were there moved in and crowded around because, we were trying to help the police, but the trust had been broken so badly that they didn't believe that that we were there to help them.
Wow.
And the one thing that really stuck out to me that you've covered before is the notes that were being passed around from people like Chrystia Freeland, and just how, to the same point that you were talking about with the police and not wanting to push out the crazies and kind of wanting to have an excuse to label the entire movement as something that it wasn't, that you see kind of within these even notes that, Freeland was writing at the time as to pressuring, I believe it was David Vigneault, the head of CSIS at the time, to give you guys a certain label that would then give them the power to treat you in a way that I think would be less than fair. But what was the notes coming out of those inner circles?
Yeah, those notes were really quite interesting. Actually, those notes were her handwritten notes taken from a meeting or a call that she had with the heads of the big banks in Canada. The Dave that she is talking with in those notes is actually the head of RBC.
Oh,
and
okay.
he basically, what those notes are instructing is these are the CEOs of the 5 major banks instructing Chrystia Phelan, former deputy minister and former finance minister, on how they could freeze our bank accounts and seize our assets and keep their hands clean, basically. And so she's right, just labeled them as terrorists and seize their assets, just like it was, pass the butter.
Wow.
We're talking about the freezing of bank accounts that happens in banana republics with no parliamentary oversight and no court order from a judge. The bank accounts of over 208 innocent Canadians were frozen. I ran into a lady here at one of the restaurants last year. She was a single mom of 3 boys. She donated $10 to the Convoy and had her bank account froze. So, I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. How any of these CEOs even kept their jobs is beyond me. I mean, one of them, hilariously, was the head of TD Bank. And if you recall, they were just given the largest fine in history for money laundering. Mm-hmm. So, but they're still in business. So you guys imagine if you guys had a business and you were caught and charged with money laundering, you wouldn't get a fine. You'd be walked out the door and your business would be shut down and you'd be in prison.
Right.
Yeah. To me, it sounds like they blurred the lines between corporate and politics. And I mean, we all know that they're hand in hand. That's how they get there. And that's how the other one's sort of able to maintain their profitability. We know that they are, but like, how are you feeling now, knowing that you were basically scapegoated for them to apply this kind of pressure nationwide and to be used as sort of a show of force against the people? Like, how does that sit with you? Because I'd be challenged. I'd be challenged to stay in this country, to be honest with you.
I mean, I certainly don't blame them. I know a lot of Canadians that are leaving and I really don't blame them because, I mean, there's a lot of scary things that could be coming down the pipe here. So honestly, I kind of wear it like a badge of honor because I am 5 feet nothing, 112 pounds. Well, maybe after 2 months of house arrest, I might be 160. But it tells me that they're scared. And it tells me that the unification of Canadians that came together under our flag and under a banner of hope in 2022 really scared the living daylights out of them. Because we've been labeled and divided 6 ways from Sunday every opportunity that they can. So if they have to have the cops coming to my house to make sure that I'm home at 12:30 at night because they're that terrified, of what Canadians can do when they rally together and they come together, that's fine by me. I have absolutely no regrets. I know Good. Judy Trin from the CBC or CTV tried to make a big deal of it after our sentencing, asking my lawyer if I was remorseful. Well, of course I'm not. I pled not guilty. For me to apologize would be a slap in the face and a knife in the back to every Canadian that did not take their own lives, that got their jobs back, that got to go see their grandparents in a nursing home, that got to kiss their dying loved ones goodbye. It gives me goosebumps. I told my lawyer before the sentencing hearing that I will serve 100 years in prison before I will ever apologize.
I love that. Honestly, what hurts my heart a little bit for you is what a great service you've done for Canadians, but how poorly the media will continue to frame you and how the government will handle this because obviously the government controls the media. Because I have nothing but applause for you. I appreciate it. It's been I know I can imagine the challenging road you've been down. Like you and I were saying earlier before the pod, it's been several years since the Freedom Convoy, and you're drowning in it every day. So, what we'll do now is sort of jump into this whole trial situation. Can you tell us how that got started? Run us through the process, where things landed, and then, sort of what the plan is now.
Well, as you well know, our mischief trial was originally slated to last 16 days and start in September of 2023. It lasted over 40 days, almost 50, and stretched out over 2 years. And just to put that into perspective, Paul Bernardo's trial was 40 days.
Jeez.
So that tells you the veracity with which they are persecuting / prosecuting this case and all of the Freedom Convoy cases for that matter. It was very long days in court. I am actually shocked at some of the stuff that the Crown has even come up with. I mean, some of their arguments were just so absolutely ridiculous. One of them insinuating that Chris must be found guilty because people laughed at his jokes on TikTok and because somebody else called him a rock star, and in his case, I mean, I think that's part of the reason, why she sentenced him as she did also is because of his TikToks. But I mean, sarcasm isn't a crime. And anybody that knows Chris Barber, or has followed him for any amount of time knows that he's not a criminal. here's just a regular guy that just wanted to keep working and joined together with a bunch of other people that just wanted to keep working and wanted, thank you, please, sir, can we have our rights and freedoms back? It's been 2 years. So the trial was very long, lots of trips to Ottawa, very expensive. Like I was saying earlier, Chris and I are so lucky and so blessed that we have the Democracy Fund and the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms covering our legal bills so that we can continue to fight this as we're moving into the appeals process.
And so, yeah, they charged you with mischief. So what is the original umbrella for that term? And then what did they use from the Freedom Convoy itself to stuff you into that box, essentially?
Well, in Canada, mischief is technically a summary offense or a misdemeanor, I guess. It means it's a minor offense. It would be like spray painting a public building, the outside of a public building or something, vandalism type of stuff. Normally, these types of things don't go to trial, let alone one that lasts over 2 years. I mean, Stephen Guilbeault himself is convicted of mischief. I think he paid a $200 fine. We're talking about a guy that, scaled the CN Tower, and not only that, terrorized Ralph Klein's wife by climbing on the roof of their house when he wasn't home. And he certainly didn't have a mischief trial. Yeah, completely a whack job. He didn't have the police showing up at his house, at 12:30 in the morning. Of that, I'm certain. So it's basically a really minor offense that they actually were pushing to treat as an indictable offense. Like they were asking for 10 years originally. They wanted us in jail for 10 years for our participation in the Freedom Convoy. But again, I mean, that type of punishment is just unheard of. Usually, like I said, you get a slap on the wrist, you get a fine. You certainly do not do, just about 50 days in jail over it, especially as a first-time nonviolent offender. So there's been a lot of firsts. In our case, longest mischief trial of all time. I had a Canada-wide warrant issued for my arrest over an alleged breach that happened a few months after the convoy ended. That charge has since been stayed. But I did 30 days in jail over that. And this is just unheard of.
So obviously we know how the institutions acted public facing, but within them, whether it be certain media outlets or whether it be, say, members of parliament or bureaucrats, did you have anyone behind the scenes reaching out to you, telling you, we think what's happening is wrong? Like, what was the sentiment coming from, say, the individuals within the institutions, not necessarily the coordinated narrative coming out of them?
Well, my MP tried really hard to get meetings with Omar Al-Gabra at the time, Marco Mendicino, Bill Blair. Like, he was actually trying to help us. And none of them wanted to speak to us, except for he did call me one day and said Candace Bergen, had 10 minutes. She could meet me at the A&W down on Slater Street or Metcalf or something. For a quick 10-minute chat. And we politely declined because, I mean, what are you going to accomplish in 10 minutes? To me, that looked like, and to our legal team, that she was just trying to set up a photo op. And we weren't there for photo ops. We were there to have a meaningful conversation about what was happening in our country and about getting our rights and freedoms back.
So there was kind of, other than maybe from your local MP, there was
you were basically stonewalled.
Basically. I mean, since then, obviously, I've had so many legal professionals, law enforcement professionals, military personnel, veterans, come to me and say that we have the majority of support. A lot of them support us. And so I always try to tell that story when I'm speaking anywhere, because so many people will come up to me and say, I support you, but, or I'd like to do this, but, or I'd like to do more, but. And I'm telling you guys, if there was no buts, we would not have any problems in this country. If there was no buts, there would be no problems.
Mm-hmm. But, I couldn't agree more.
People have a lot to lose. And I mean, for example, this blew my mind a little bit. I had a lady who's a criminal defense lawyer in Ontario, a former Crown prosecutor. I think she was a Crown prosecutor for between 15 and 20 years, sent me a message, beautiful message, very heartfelt. And she told me that every single lawyer, that she's talked to has expressed concern about this case, believes that it's wrong, and believes that the rule of law is being completely manipulated. But how many have spoken up? Like, what do we have? 5 lawyers? out of 300,000 lawyers. But can you imagine if all these same lawyers actually stood up and said, this is not working, this is not happening anymore, this whole problem would go away?
Well, what I've noticed is like Canadians are relatively apathetic. That's just sort of a blanket macro unfortunate narrative that rules our society. But we hear a lot of the same stuff. People will agree with our content or agree with our concepts or ideas, and they'll give you the same thing, but they can't share it or can't do this or can't do that because of the ramifications. But this is kind of the bigger concern that I have is you guys were used as sort of a scapegoat to enforce their will, which has now scared more people into submission. So, I mean, do you see this turning around? How do you feel that Canada gets out of this mess?
Oh boy, that is such a tough question because it has to be changed. I mean, people ask me all the time if I'm going to run for office or be PM. Well, how? There's not one single party in this country that I would taint my name by attaching itself to. How do you do that? And even if I did, once you get into it, you're stuck. You're a cog in the wheel.
Yes.
So, I mean, we have a country that was based on a Westminster parliamentary system. There was no lords and ladies in Canada when this was set up. I mean, I hate to sound black-pilled, but the farther along I go on my own journey, I realize that all these institutions that Canadians were told were set up to protect them, to give them a voice, to support them, aren't. They don't. We're supposed to have a judiciary. The law is not set up to help. Chris and I were just talking about this yesterday. The law is not set up to help people like me and Chris. So what happened yesterday was Chris was going to file a lawsuit, of course, for the text messages that the Crown prosecutor unconstitutionally, he breached his charter rights in obtaining. And then he leaked them to the press. So Chris has a very strong, in my opinion, case. I mean, they were not correctly obtained. And so they should be held accountable for that. But the Crown has come back and just said, no, we're not going to hear it. So could you imagine to do something like that, to start a lawsuit or an action like that, you actually have to get the Crown's permission for us to go after them, to sue them into civil action. Like, make it make sense. But yet I've sat in a courtroom. I have listened to blatant lies. These guys have called me names. They have treated me like I am Hannibal Lecter, for Pete's sake, right? I mean, just those terrible things that they say, and there's just no accountability. And then we get accused of the first Crown prosecutor on our case, who was interesting, was pulled off of our case after my book came out because I made him look ridiculous. Well, actually, he made himself look ridiculous. I just put it in words. But he made a statement about it to the press afterwards that his name was mentioned in my book 60 times, some of them defamatory. Are you kidding me? Like, I'm sorry, some of them were defamatory. You wanted me thrown in jail for 10 years. And you were treating me like I was, like I don't even know. Like, it was just absolutely, there's no balance here. And we need to get back to a balance, not just with the judiciary, but with our parliament, with all of it. And it's just become so lopsided. And,
yeah.
I think a lot of Canadians feel like me some days, and it's just like, what can you do? We don't have any recall legislation. Once we have an elected prime minister, we're screwed. I mean, how many times has our governor general in a normal world would have put a stop to all this? But she's too busy, spending $300,000 on new wardrobes and dyeing her hair purple.
Well, and that's one thing, especially you were talking about the way that the legal system here is used. But at the same time that they are expending a exorbitant amount of resources trying to persecute you and Chris Barber, they're also saying that, we don't have the resources to deal with violent criminals. They were seeking 10-year prison sentences for you, but then at the same time when there was just a recent case that we covered a couple weeks ago where a Pakistani immigrant driver had a road rage incident that ended up killing a woman, and the judges overturned his deportation orders because that wouldn't give him another chance. And so you see this where it's like non-citizens, like people that weren't born here, are given every protection possible under the rule of law, and then simultaneously they're weaponizing it against people that actually really care about the not only Canada but also its systems and its institutions and want to see them functioning properly. And that's why I've always, felt that our political class has more or less become actually hostile to both Canada and its people.
Yes.
But, when we look at that, I think, because as you pointed out, a lot of people do feel like, well, what can we do about it? At that point, I think, not participating in it is the only option. And to, even if you don't have an immense amount of power to push back, you do use what power you have in order to. And I think as well, like when you were talking about how people aren't willing to come forward and really stake their own, if I think people fall into this false belief that, well, if I just keep my head down and don't say anything or don't do anything, then I'll be able to skate by all of this. But there's a certain point where that's not a real reality, and it will come for everybody. And so for me, it's like, I think you should, or Canadians in general, should be willing to pay that price now, because the price and the consequences are only going to become worse down the line. But I guess where I'd want to turn this into a question for you is, throughout all of this, I think the most admirable thing I've seen from the outside is your ability to maintain a positive perspective. I see you make posts all the time online about how grateful you are for the things around you, how much you love the country. What is it in that mindset that allows you to still have, I guess, not just fall into that completely nihilistic view?
Well, I'm very stubborn, put it that way. I am very, very stubborn. I've always felt like I think I'm a positive person. I don't like to dwell or feel sorry for myself. I don't consider myself to be a victim. And, if there's one thing that doing some time in jail will teach you, it's to be grateful for the little things. When a guard sneaks a little package of instant coffee under your cell door so that you can at least have a coffee. When guards are kind to you or tell you to stay strong and don't give up, or thank you for saving their families. I mean, when you're in a situation like that, you just grab onto those little moments, and they just mean like exponentially so much more than they normally would. And we just take stuff like this for granted. So, I mean, I'm doing house arrest. I'm with my family and my grandsons. I just got to go meet my new little granddaughter, and spend 2 weeks in beautiful Manitoba with my other two daughters. And, I think at the end of the day, Chris and I have started a show. We've got a house arrest live stream. It's called House Arrest every Thursday at 6 p.m.
Nice.
So we can kind of mock. We have to mock it, because otherwise I think I would just lose my mind, because it's like you just said, when you compare how we're being treated to how violent sexual offenders or just violent offenders are being treated, it's laughable. But it really shows their vindictiveness and their pettiness. And I feel like the harder that they come after me, I mean, it's a gauge for just how thoroughly afraid of us they are.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think I'm an eternal optimist. So I think being the same, it's really the only way to be. I can certainly appreciate that. Being grateful for what you do have and using a sense of humor to get through is really the only way to do a lot of things in life. So we're very much on the same page there. Can you quickly sort of tell the people, what your sentencing was, where you're currently at with that, but then also what you're doing next? Like, how do you plan on appealing this, and what does that process look like?
Absolutely. Well, I have filed an appeal for my mischief conviction. The day after I filed that appeal, the Crown came back and basically appealed they cross-appealed my appeal, and they're appealing the rest of it, the sentence as well as the rest of the charges. If I remember correctly, there was 2 acquittals and 2 stays of mine, and same with Chris. And so they're coming back to appeal all that because they think that we should be in jail for, I guess, 7 and 8 years, which is really what they wanted to begin with. So we're going to start that whole process. As far as I know, obviously this is my first kick at the can with this, but as far as I understand, the appeals process is mostly paperwork between the lawyers and the appellate judges. So there shouldn't be any traveling for us necessary for this portion. And then I guess depending on how the appellate's rules on these, we'll see if we get back to a trial and a second trial. Again, we're looking at 2.5 to 3 years down the road if we get that far. So in the meantime, we're just going to keep fighting as best as we can. And we are both sentenced to 18 months in jail, or 18 months total, 1 year of house arrest plus 6 months for a 6 months curfew, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. I got some credit for some time served, so my sentence will be up January 21st of 2027. And I believe Chris's will be in March, the following March of 2027.
It's crazy.
So what does the house arrest process look like? How often are they popping by? Does it feel like they're there to be a nuisance to you? The actual officers themselves. What's that whole thing look like?
Well, I've only had one police visit so far, which kind of shocked me. I'm really surprised that the Shoal Lake RCMP didn't come out to the cabin because I thought, that she might want to test me. My probation officer just might want to test me to see if I was being so far from home, but I didn't have any visits out there. He seemed fine. I guess the thing is I asked around. I understand I'm on a list. They have to come do their job. I totally get that. However, I've had numerous police officers, former police officers, and people that have worked in that area contact me saying, our check-ins are totally normal. They don't usually do them after 11 p.m. And generally speaking, if it's after 11 p.m., they're being jerks, is what I've been told. But whatever, I just come over. The sad thing is I've got 2 grandsons that live here too, and so. Next time they show up at that hour, my daughter said she's going to wake my little grandson up from bed and answer the door with a baby on her hip.
Yeah, that's kind of honestly, I'm in bed by 10 p.m. I'd be so pissed.
Me too. I said, if I'm gonna lose my mind and bust out of my house arrest, I'm gonna go to Starbucks for a frappuccino in business hours. Where am I gonna be
exactly.
at 12:30 at night? I'm 53 years old.
Jeez, that's frustrating. So big question. And I think you've earned this, is you've built sort of this character that's larger than life in a sense because of your actions, how you've handled this and where you're at and what it means to Canadians, at least the Canadians that are paying attention and appreciate you, which I think should be all of them, but it is whatever it is. So now that you've sort of established this, and I don't mean to quantify this from a business perspective, it's just the easiest way to look at it, but you've sort of established this brand equity that carries weight and carries value and people trust you. So what are you going to do next for Canada, for yourself, and how are you going to kind of continue this fight?
Well, I definitely want to get involved more in the Alberta independence movement because I think there's a lot of benefits to Albertans in that. Not saying that I wish to see the demise of Canada, because obviously with my experience, there's nothing I would love to see a very healthy, functioning country that's taking care of the needs of its people, and I don't see that happening. I'm a big believer of dusting off your own doorstep first and making sure that you can come from a place of peace and strength before you can help anybody else. And so when I see our country, sending billions of dollars to the Ukraine, even after, this corruption has been revealed, it makes me want to take my province and leave, honestly, because that money could be going to help our veterans, our vaccine injured. That money could be going to help Canadians. So it's disappointing. But so I definitely want to get more active. I think for now that the baby's come and I'm back home and kind of be settling back in here, I'll be reaching out to some people to see what I can do, obviously from home. And, I'm not going to rule out some type of politics. I don't think politics, but maybe some type of lobby, just for our rights and freedoms. We're just losing more and more every day. And like you guys were saying earlier, we shouldn't live in a country where we have to be afraid to speak our minds. We shouldn't have to self-censor. We shouldn't have to silently support people because we're afraid of the repercussions and what our government's going to do to us. And I just want people to know, the judge said in our case, she was giving us the sentence because she didn't want to deter people from peaceful assembly. Well, I mean, 3.5 years of lawfare, 2 years in trial, an 18-month sentence obviously is going to deter people. That's exactly what they're trying to do. But nobody can take your freedom away, truly. I feel more free now than ever. I mean, they can't take that away from me. They can't take anything away from you unless you hand it over. And so people just have to be strong. They have to maybe be willing to sacrifice something. I mean, maybe, you're not going to get to keep that big boat, or, maybe you'll have to give something up. But lots of people have given up much, much, much more. And I think the thing is just we got to get back to humanity. That's the number one thing, is we got to get back to just caring about each other first. And for me, you asked earlier on in this interview what the greatest thing about being there was, and that's what it was. It was seeing Canadians looking after each other the way that I remember them doing when I was a kid. Bringing food, bringing firewood, bringing blankets, bringing water. We didn't go without, even though all of that money was tied up and taken away from us. We still got through because Canadians looked after each other. And I think fundamentally that's ground zero where we have to start from.
I agree.
Oh yeah, the Tallow Truth. I've been using their products for at least 2 years now. It's all beef tallow skincare. I honestly love everything they have. I got hooked on their flagship skin cream F-Bomb. Then I found out they had a sunscreen substitute, and it's awesome. I even use it on my kids. And then in one of my orders, they included like this lip chap. And I don't know about you, but I'm like a lip chap essentialist. I know that's not a real thing. But anyway, I'm now addicted to their mint tallow lip chap. Then they came out with this product called the Freedom Face Whip. Dude, it's literally the nicest thing I've ever put on my skin. And now they have a soap. So yeah, the Tallow Truth is what's up. I literally put that on everything.
I would love to hear your perspective more on the Albertan independence movement, because actually I got a good chuckle. I was when looking the other night, I pulled up your Wikipedia page, and the very first sentence is that you're a far right Albertan separatist. And I just couldn't wrap my head around this hypocrisy when it comes to, for instance, Quebec separatism and Albertan separatism, and how these two sentiments are more or less coming from the same place, that we don't feel like we fit into Canada, that, Canada itself doesn't represent us. It's a very similar, essentially emotional place. But then you look at how those two provinces are treated differently. Like the Bloc Québécois is a separatist party, and they get representation within Parliament, and the Liberal Party is constantly pandering to them. And I mean, Ottawa in general is pandering to them. And nobody bats an eye at that. But why do you think it is that the Albertan independence movement essentially gets so much condescension?
Well, I think in a nutshell, it's because it creates division. And trust me, Ottawa does not want Quebec and Alberta to get along, because if we did, we would be unstoppable. They're heavily vested in keeping us arguing with each other and keeping the East and West divide alive and well, in my opinion. But as far as, Alberta independence, I believe that we're in a very unhealthy relationship. And I think Alberta has tried over and over and over again to, the mantra or the tagline for the Reform Party was "the West wants in." And so it was really ironic. I am called a separatist. I mean, I was a part of the Maverick, the Wexit organization that turned into the Maverick federal. We created a federal party from nothing, Western Independence Party. And I was still on the board of that during the convoy. I actually resigned the Tuesday after we arrived. I resigned because, just coming across the country and seeing all those flags and all those people, I was like, I don't want to leave. This country is so worth saving. And then here we are again. And, I think yesterday is another prime example of what is going on and what Ottawa truly thinks of Albertans. I mean, I watched this MOU nonsense, which is all it was. Meaningless signatures on meaningless paper to throw Albertans a bone and shut them up for a week. And then they have this vote in the House of Commons yesterday. And, a lot of people actually thought that was great. It was good and it was progress and it meant something. But I mean, if you've lived in this province long enough, you know that all of this stuff is nonsense. How many tax dollars were just wasted in the last 2 weeks on politicians talking about a useless MOU, having meetings, press conferences, and the vote in the House of Commons? Like, I mean, that's what people also need to wake up to. You have to get up to 50,000 feet and see that this is just a game. I mean, that was just a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah, I'm very much see it the same way. I think what the government does is they parse things out into single sections, so it's a little harder to see the whole puzzle. And then they do their photo ops and they manage their media and they convince everybody that they're moving the needle in the right direction. But I think a lot of it really just feeds corruption, vote buying, and trying to, like you said, sort of manage our resources. I don't think they're going to let Alberta go easily. I think they contribute about 17% of the GDP, and they're primarily, obviously, all the energy for the country and, what's getting transported to the US. So I think that there's going to be a kicking and screaming fight to make sure that Alberta stays within the country. Do you think there's a reasonable chance? Like, what do you think the odds are of it actually pulling apart?
Well, there's a lot of separation talk here. I have to say, people are fed up and they're frustrated, and they feel like we've been sort of the punching bag for a long time. And that is a very much, that's what they treated us like we were just, well, I think even the mayor of Ottawa called us hillbillies and thugs, or hooligans and thugs, or something like that. Like, I'm proudly a redneck hillbilly. I grew up on the back of a horse in Saskatchewan.
I'm also a redneck. Yeah, let's go.
I'm happy. I mean, that's taught me a lot of valuable things, more so than sitting in a cubicle in Ottawa. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think they have a vested interest in keeping us divided. I think that's the number one thing, even more so than the money, than the donations, that scared them about the Freedom Convoy, was to see all of these labels dropped. Again, I'll say it over and over. It didn't matter what god you worshipped, what color your skin was, where you came from. It didn't matter how much money you made. People dropped all of those labels, and we were just Canadians. And so we need to get back to that. We need to get back to that fundamentally. And it's a beautiful country full of beautiful people, and it is worth saving. It's just, every day that goes by, I think that the hill gets a little bit tougher to climb,
Well, I think that what you were talking about there with the mayor of Ottawa and his comments, I think that really dives into the psychology of these people, and I've even seen it on a local level with certain people, like even just that I know in my day to day, where there's this really look down upon the blue collar people in the nation, especially from these more elite types or people that were, say, born in an upper class nature. But what I find so appalling about that is that without the blue collar people, they don't exist. The elite class can only sit on top of the shoulders of the blue collar. Like, even if you just think about it as a society in and of itself, it's like you've got bases that need to be covered, which is manufacturing, agriculture, energy, and so on. And all of this administration can only happen once those bases are covered. But then you just see it where these people go like, yeah, you're nothing. Like, your opinion doesn't matter. It's almost as if they are, more to be managed than they are to be respected.
100%. There was a lady actually, Trish Woods is currently making a documentary about the trial. And so she was in Ottawa, and she interviewed, she wants to obviously have a balanced story. So she interviewed people, that weren't on her side. They were in opposition. And one of the ladies that she said she interviewed, fully admitted that, she never left her apartment, and that she stayed inside. She stayed indoors those 2 weeks because she'd never met a truck driver before. She was afraid. She'd never met somebody that worked in the Alberta oil patch before. She was afraid. But at least she had the self-awareness to admit that, and to say that maybe she was wrong, and that she that's an irrational fear. I mean, I've never met a zookeeper before, but I wouldn't be terrified to go out and shake his hand and take him a coffee.
Yeah.
So, but there is very much that sense out there in some circles, and it's called the Ottawa bubble, and it is alive and well.
Well, and that's where I see this separatism movement kind of gaining steam is, I just wrote a piece on it the other day. about how the Forever Canadian movement and its leader were trying to position the separatists as just angry white men. You know, they're irrational people, that they're militant and armed to the teeth is one way that he described them. And just like, it boggled my mind that he can sit there and say, this movement is a serious threat to Canada, but then simultaneously try to position it as, but the people that are involved in this movement are unserious. They're undeserving of respect. And to me, it's like, okay, well, if you want to keep Canada together, then you better start showing them some respect instead of doubling down on this nature of just being like, your opinion doesn't actually matter here, because you're just going to drive that more and more. So, yeah, what are you seeing in the, say, on the ground sentiment from people in Alberta? You were mentioning that this is growing, but like, how do you see that manifesting? Like, is it just talks at the coffee shop? Is it more like actual action? What does that look like?
Well, there's tons of town halls going on around Alberta right now. Obviously, I'm not going to any of them, but APP, the Alberta Prosperity Project, is hosting a lot of town halls. They're going all around Alberta just to talk about this. And what a great organization. They've just started one in Saskatchewan too, called the Saskatchewan Prosperity Project. But I went to one of their first meetings that they had in Medicine Hat a couple of years ago, and I was really impressed because it's educational. And what they do is they were laying out, for people to understand how the pension would work. For example, they brought in an economist, or how the legal framework would look like, what law enforcement would look like. So they're really going above and beyond as far as educating the public, and they're getting great turnouts at all of these meetings. And so, I mean, it's definitely, I think the vote will come next year, and I think it could pass. I mean, I think there's a good chance that it could pass. And you're right, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be angry about it. And I think the federal government will probably try to put up a fight. But again, like you said, I mean, Quebec's already done a lot of the groundwork for us.
Yeah.
So, so in essence, they've kind of done us a favor, because we're not just completely starting from scratch. But I mean, it's things like what happened in the House of Commons yesterday that are going to drive Albertans away. And it's one thing, the Bloc Québécois, again, like you said, how does a National Separatist Party even get seats in the House of Commons, first of all, because they have a direct say in affairs that matter to Alberta.
Right.
So how does that even happen? I mean, and they don't, why would they even get a say on our pipeline? First of all. And second of all, why wouldn't they want us to be prosperous? Because they keep taking our money. I lived in Quebec for 2 months during the beginning of our trial, and you can tell where the resources, they're not hurting. Quebec is not hurting. I can drive from here to Calgary probably 10 times and not see one police officer. And, Dwayne and I would drive into court an hour and 20 minutes every day, and there's like traffic cops everywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how this is all sort of coming together. I appreciate you sharing that, like you're seeing these prosperity groups sort of explain the process to people, because I think the gray area is what makes this so challenging to commit to, going, how would this actually play out? But now that that's happening and there's a reasonable amount of attendance, I think that's a huge pillar to actually see this come to fruition. And then I think the other thing too, which you had mentioned, is, this sort of MOU. I mean, if this energy deal falls apart, there could be a real chance that Alberta does actually separate, which I think you'd see Manitoba follow suit. Then you'd see Quebec jump in that conversation. It could be quite detrimental. It'll be interesting to watch this unfold over the next couple of years, because here's the thing. We are also we don't like to be black-pilled. We like to believe that there's some hope. We like to believe, hey, if you want your institutions to work, you should work for your institutions. That is how we feel. But the reality is they're making it harder and harder. To your point, the hill is getting steeper and steeper, and it's snowing outside. So you kind of look at it's like, hey, this is maybe insurmountable. And if it actually is insurmountable, it's not, hey, give up hope. It's find another solution. And maybe that's exactly what this is. And maybe that's where we have to, maybe that's the direction Canada and the people that believe in the things we believe in have to go. And then we just sort of separate ourselves out and kind of start from scratch, maybe try to do it better the second time, Well,
and the reality is, I'm not very worldly, but I have been across the country a few times now. And the reality is that every province in Canada is unique and special truly in its own way. They have different lifestyles. They have different industries. And so to try and create laws and legislation that blanket, I mean, gun laws in Toronto, my daughter lives on a farm in Manitoba with bears and cougars and wolves. I mean, she's got to take a gun with her if she takes her kids for a walk. So how can you lay a blanket legislation like that? So, I mean, but there's so many beautiful things. And I prefer to think of it as, maybe Alberta will be the trailblazer, and maybe, that will give other provinces the courage to look at getting out from it. Cause it's really Ottawa. I mean, I don't think even Alberta wants to separate from Canada. I think we just want to separate from Ottawa, because if we're tired of these bureaucrats, they're supposed to be public servants taking care of their own people. And it's not happening.
No, they're our biggest burden. Yeah.
They are our biggest burden. I mean, I come from I'm all for helping other people, and I'm all for helping other countries, but not so long as there's one Canadian veteran living in a tent on the street. I mean, we can't help it's just not realistic. You can't be helpful unless you come from a place of strength yourself. So, I mean, I'm all for looking after Canada. Again, I would hate to see the country split up, but I mean, it might be what the rest of Canada needs to see to separate themselves from that bubble.
Yeah, what I like to say is sometimes you have to choose between two bad options. That's how it goes.
That's correct.
Yeah. And I also I see that, whether it's on an individual level, a family level, a community level, or a national level like this, that when the pot is growing and things are getting better for everyone, people do have a little bit less of a selfish attitude or trying to protect themselves. It's kind of like, well, hey, yeah, maybe I didn't gain as much as that person or that province, but we're all gaining. So at the end of the day, it's good. But over the last 10 years or so, what we've been seeing with Canada is that pot is definitely shrinking. And then that's where you start to get this, whoa, I need to look out for my own here. And I think that's a completely valid sentiment to have when you see that pot shrinking. And so you look at somebody like Alberta, like something like Alberta, and you go, yeah, hey, you're putting all of these handcuffs on our industry, and this industry is subsidizing your healthcare. So like at what point are we going to separate from this kind of parasitical system? So yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see how all of this plays out between Alberta. I mean, obviously there's more to Canada, but I think the big power centers really do come down to Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, and kind of seeing whether those three want to maintain or whether they want to go their own separate ways. But is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up here? Where can people find you? Is there anything you want Canadians to know?
Well, just one final thought on what you were just talking about, and that is, wouldn't it be nice to turn on the TV and question period and see both sides of the house sitting together at a table trying to solve problems instead of the theatrical nonsense that we get shoved down our throats? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be nice if the premiers of the country, worked together and supported each other and helped each province, with their, like I said, they're all unique. They all have their own industries to help them be prosperous and successful. I mean, the David Eby in BC that doesn't want our pipeline, but yet, and our tankers, Alberta Oil, with the C58 or C48, pardon me. There's oil tankers that are up and down the BC coast every day. There's cruise ships that are up and down the BC coast every day, but he just doesn't want Alberta Oil on the BC coast every day. So we need to get back to a place where we can all work together, where we can support each other, and where we can help each other be prosperous and safe and secure and healthy and happy. And other than that, I just want to thank you so much for having me on your show. And it's been long overdue, so I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Thanks, Tamara. We appreciate you, what you've done for Canadians and what it sounds like you're going to continue to do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, much appreciated. Thanks all for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.